In 1994, The Lion King was released to a massive success for Disney, gaining both financial and critical acclaim and becoming the highest-grossing hand-drawn animated film in history, as well as a popular favorite among Disney fans. I myself proudly regard this movie as my favorite movie of all time, and given the huge rise in popularity this movie garnered, it would have been no surprise that a sequel would be in the works sooner or later. Well, in 1998, 4 years after the release of the first film, that became a reality. The Lion King 2: Simba's Pride is the direct-to-video follow-up to the original film, and it continues the story of Simba and company in a brand new adventure. This movie is among Disney's collection of numerous direct-to-video sequels or prequels or midquels, whatever they are, which started in the early 1990s and recently ended in the late 2000s. Many of these movies tend to have a bad reputation since most of them aren't well received by critics and audiences, who tend to compare them to their predecessors. This is a case with me too, even when it comes to a franchise that I hold dear to my heart like no other. However, this is still Lion King related, and given how much I love the original film, I think this movie should still be given a fair judgment to see how it holds up on its own and if it does the franchise justice. Picking up where the original film left off, The Lion King 2 tells the story of Simba and Nala's newborn cub, Kiara. Much like her father in the first film, she is destined to rule the Pride Lands when her time comes. While the film touches on this in a few scenes, the story takes a completely different turn and focuses on something new. When Kiara is young, she meets another lion cub named Kovu, whom she becomes friends with after helping him escape from a crocodile-infested river. Unfortunately for her, Kovu is part of a pride of lions that Simba banished from the Pride Lands for their continuous loyalty to Scar. These are the Outsiders, led by the revenge-driven Zira, Kovu's mother. The cubs are separated from each other by their respective parents, but upon entering adolescence, Kiara and Kovu fall in love with each other and realize they must unite their prides together and bring an end to their family's conflict. As already mentioned, this is a completely different story to that of the first film. In this case, it focuses more on a love story and character development on a selected few characters, how their actions move the plot forward, and even showing how far some have come in relation to how they were in the first film. As different as the movie can be to its predecessor though, it does share some similarities. One thing I forgot to mention in my review of the first film is that that movie is more or less inspired by the Shakespeare story, Hamlet. While The Lion King 2 doesn't share similarities to that tragedy, it does share similarities to another Shakespeare play, Romeo and Juliet. This is displayed prominently with the love story between Kiara and Kovu, and how their families are at odds with each other throughout the movie. This helps save the film from being a retread of the original and allows for new story potential with characters, both old and new. So that's how the film compares to the original. But on its own, how exactly does it hold up? To me, the original is far more superior, and I'm sure a lot of other Lion King fans feel the same way. But that's not to say the sequel is automatically bad. Far from it, actually. As far as the Lion King film goes, it's actually very good. It does a great job of telling a new story in the Pride Lands universe, while at the same time respecting the original film in more ways than one. Such examples of doing this include the fact that it keeps the African feel to it with its music, has most of the original cast back for their respective roles, and having the original characters keep the charm and likability they had beforehand, while at the same time having some subtle changes to them that for the most part are nice ways of showing how much has changed in between films. The new characters introduced here also help make this movie a lot of fun, with Kiara and Kovu being whom the movie would focus on the most. Kiara is presented as being adventurous and oftentimes rebellious, a trait that one can trace back to Simba in the first film when he was a cub, yet at the same time being uncertain about becoming Queen of the Pride Lands in the future. This helps separate Kiara from being a cheap clone of Simba in the first film. And one other thing about Kiara that's among her biggest pros is her unprejudiced mind, which comes in mighty handy throughout the story. This personality trait of hers helps resolve the conflict and is what helps her become friends with Kovu in the first place. Speaking of Kovu, he is another engaging character whom I would say goes through some of the strongest character development throughout the film. At first coming off as aggressive and cocky as a result of growing up under Zira's harsh training, he begins to improve himself once he spends more time with Kiara, showing a more funny and cheerful side. Coupled with his character development, fun personality, and awesome performance by Jason Marsden, Kovu is one of the most engaging and sympathetic characters in the whole franchise. Joining these two are Kovu's siblings, Vitani and Nuka, the former being very ruthless and loyal to her mother's cause, while the latter is more impulsive and actually a bit sympathetic, due to his urge to gain Zira's appreciation, though always failing in the end. However, these two pale in comparison to the big bad herself, Zira, whom I regard as one of the most awesome yet underrated Disney villains of all time. This character is presented as a fierce adversary to the heroes and is fueled by persistent and bloodthirsty vengeance. Her evil ambition is very strong and what causes her to make her decisions throughout the film. Coupled with her vengeance, she's also very cunning and intelligent, seeing as how she uses Kovu as a means to get rid of Simba by having him bond with Kiara, before using that trust to eliminate the king and allow Zira and her pride to return to power. Not only that, she's also very ruthless and uncaring towards her own children, showing no love or affection to them while they're around, and even willing to sell them out for her own purposes, a flaw in which by the end of the film proves to be her undoing when the outsiders abandon her and agree to go back to Simba's pride. With all this in mind, I find Zira to be one of the best characters in this film, and a super fun villain too. Almost as good as Scar to some degree, yet not actually accomplishing her goal like Scar did. I mean, a truly sinister personality and goal, an awesome performance by Suzanne Pleshette, and even an intense villain song, My Lullaby? What more could you ask for? Speaking of songs, this movie offers a soundtrack that I think is another thing about this movie that deserves recognition. While not on par with Elton John's music from the first film, they're still executed very well and help bring out the emotion the movie tries to sell. The two songs that stand out to me the most are We Are One and He Lives in You. For the former, it's a very heartwarming song that shows Simba taking the wisdom from his father and putting it in his own words while explaining it to Kiara. His message about how they're all part of the great circle of life helps make for a very inspiring music number. As for He Lives in You, though, it's more of a memorial song for Mufasa that, like the Mufasa's ghost scene from the first film, is something that I turn to when remembering deceased loved ones. This music number, sung beautifully by Levo M, is shown at the beginning of the film, and just like Circle of Life, it's accompanied by animals traveling to Pride Rock, all while the sun raises high into the sky, before they all cheer with glee when Rafiki presents the newborn Kiara to them. This song helps make the opening of the movie a beautiful sequence, and having originated from the Lion King soundtrack With 'Em at the Pride Lands, and later used in the Broadway show, it helps show that the sequel does respect its predecessor. Unfortunately, as good as a sequel this is, it still has some shortcomings that are actually much more noticeable and troubling than the hyena fly I talked about in my review of the first film. For starters, I didn't really get how a section of the Pride Land Lions would be so loyal to Scar. As it is shown in the first movie, Scar's reign has some nasty consequences that send the kingdom into a desolate wasteland with little to no food or water. And by the time Scar confesses to everyone that he killed Mufasa, all of the lions are seen charging in and attacking Scar's evil force. None of them turn on Simba, Nala, or any of the other heroes, which can easily make one ask the question, were there really lions who actually enjoyed all the trouble that Scar was giving to the kingdom? And if so, where were they during the fight? Of course, them being included in the sequel was done to give the movie a conflict that our heroes have to face, and while Zira and her pride of outsiders are executed very well in a villainous sense, the basic idea of them being loyal to Scar still feels a little weak to some degree. The biggest flaw I have with them, though, is actually related to Kovu. In the movie, Kovu is addressed as being the one to take Scar's place as king, which gives Simba a legitimate reason to be wary of him. To avoid making Kovu's love story with Kiara like a promotion of incest, they address that Scar isn't his father in some moments of expository dialogue. But that's basically it. There's no scene further explaining Kovu's origins and why Scar chose him, nor is there even a flashback with young Kovu with Scar, which I feel can give some viewers confusion. The reason I bring this up is because Kovu's design is very similar to Scar's, and that can make someone who hasn't seen the movie mistake him for Scar's son. This also begs the question if Zira was actually Scar's mate, since she's so fanatically loyal to the deceased tyrant. And if she was, does that mean Kovu was adopted or something? This is a very puzzling topic that I wish was better explained in order to avoid this confusion. Something else I've noticed with the film is how some characters from the original aren't as significant here as they were beforehand. This isn't actually a flaw, but rather more of a missed opportunity in my book. The biggest examples would have to be Nala and Zazu. Nala is now a calm voice of reason for Simba, who doesn't really contribute much to the plot involving Kiara and Kovu, while Zazu functions as a background messenger for Simba about trouble in the kingdom. I mean, granted they may not have had that big of an impact on the story anyway, but I feel that it would have been nice if they got more screen time and have their own scenes that could leave a bigger impact on the film. Like, maybe Nala has a moment with Kovu and her kindness and wisdom would further help him change his ways related to the outsiders, and maybe Zazu would accompany Timon and Pumbaa while they watch over Kiara when she's a cub. The latter could have actually added on to the comic relief since Zazu was the babysitter in the first film, and now he would have to share this position with the Hakuna Matata duo. It would have provided some interesting and intriguing, not to mention hilarious chemistry between him and Timon and Pumbaa. These, however, are just minor nitpicks, and seeing these characters in the film is still fun enough for me. Timon and Pumbaa once again provide some funny comic relief throughout the film. Rafiki is once again the eccentric shaman who actually helps Kiara and Kovu get together with his awesome Upendi song, and Simba is once again shown as the king of the Pride Lands, having accomplished his goal in the first film and holding on to it here. This, however, leads me to talking about another big problem that I have with this movie. Simba here is presented as an overprotective father to Kiara and is reluctant about sending his daughter anywhere for fear of injury or worse. Because of this, he often sends Timon and Pumbaa to keep an eye on her while she's out and about, even when persuaded by others that there's nothing to worry about. The first time this happens is kind of understandable, since Kiara is just a young cub, but the second time this happens is when Kiara is an adolescent, and Simba agrees to let her go on her first hunt solo. The moment she and the other lionesses are out of earshot, though, he immediately goes back on his word and once again sends Timon and Pumbaa after her. And if that wasn't enough, when he and Nala rush out to find Kiara during a huge fire, and finding her okay and talking with Kovu, Simba outright forbids her from going on any more hunts. One might say that this is because of the outsiders still being a threat, but if one remembers some of Simba's development in the first film, it can make some of his actions here very cringeworthy. In the first movie, Simba learned the important lesson of learning from his past and putting it behind him for his future. This helped him get back on track with his goal to defeat Scar and reclaim the Pride Lands, which is one reason why I find him a great character worth rooting for. In the sequel, though, it's like all the lessons he learned meant nothing to him anymore, and he turned into an overprotective parent because he couldn't let go of the damage that Scar had done to him. Probably the biggest flaw he makes in relation to this is when he exiles Kovu from the Pride Lands after a horrific ambush set upon him by the outsiders, while he and Kovu were out on a walk. Ignoring his daughter's pleas for reconsideration, having no remorse for his actions, and even forbidding Kiara from leaving his sight, it really troubles me to see Simba go through with this, up to the point where when Kiara shouts, "You will never be Mufasa," I find myself agreeing with her wholeheartedly. I mean, all of this happens right after it seems Simba is going to accept Kovu in a heartwarming scene that showed Simba's true development in character. And to see it suddenly take a U-turn and go down the drain is just so hard to watch. Good grief. Fortunately, as rough as these scenes with Simba can be, he remedies these wrongdoings during the film's climax, where Kiara and Kovu return to put an end to the war that's going on between the Pridelanders and outsiders. Here, Kiara utters the same words of wisdom that Simba told her when she was a cub, and this helps put an end to the fight, as well as show Simba how Kiara has grown throughout the film. This makes him drop his prejudice and try to make peace with Zira. Zira, of course, consumed by her persistent vengeance, refuses, claiming that she'll quote-unquote, never let it go. Someone could use some words of wisdom from Elsa, I see. And with this, and in a last-ditch effort to finish off Simba, she leaps forward, only to be knocked aside by Kiara. This causes the duo to plummet into the nearby gorge, where Zira is swept away by the raging flow of water, ending her terror once and for all, while Kiara manages to save herself and climb to safety. Despite this loss, Simba welcomes Kovu and the outsiders back into his pride with open arms, and this leads to a very satisfying ending where Kiara and Kovu are married, and together with them and Nala, Simba roars out to the kingdom, signifying that the conflict is over and the two brides are back together at last. Combined with a beautiful instrumental of We Are One, some last bit of comic relief from Timon and Pumbaa, all the lions roaring together, and Mufasa congratulating his son from the heavens, it all makes for a glorious finale that I feel helps end the movie, as well as the franchise, on a beautiful note. The Lion King 2 is a movie that tries and succeeds in being different from its predecessor, yet respecting it with what it has to offer. Both of these help the movie stand out in its own unique way, and make it a memorable movie for what it has. When I say I love the first movie more than this, it's not a knock against the sequel by any means. The story engaging, the return of familiar favorites, animation that's nicely done, and songs that have become beautifully memorable, I'd say this movie is a worthwhile addition to the LK franchise, as well as one of the best direct-to-video sequels Disney has to offer. Given the already mentioned negative reputation that most of these follow-ups get, that's really saying something. Of course, I won't ignore those confusing origins of Kovu and the Outsiders, or the characterization of Simba that give this movie some problems, but like I said before, each movie has its number of faults, and I don't think this movie's flaws should penalize the overall adventure this movie has. And so with that said, I personally would have to give The Lion King 2 Simba's Pride a B. And before you ask, no, I did not do this review with The Lion Guard in mind. That series came out several years after The Lion King 2, and is just a spin-off that was created to cash in on the series. Some of the points I made during this review may be in contrast to what happens in some episodes, but this review was done to judge the film as a follow-up to the original, and how it holds up on its own, not in relation to something that came out almost 2 decades later. Maybe someday I'll look into The Lion Guard, but that's a discussion for another time. For now, I hope you enjoyed today's review of The Lion King 2, and until next time, this is KGrove94 signing off, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Hakuna Matata, everyone.